Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, May 28th, Maplewood City Council Manager Workshop. Council, we are meeting on a little unusual time frame because of Memorial Holiday yesterday, so we're meeting tonight. City Clerk Sint, would you do the roll call for us? Let's start with that.
Councilmember Lee.
Present.
Councilmember Cave. Here. Councilmember Juniman. Mayor Abrams.
I'm here as well, thank you. Council members, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Cave, seconded by Lee. The motion to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We have no unfinished business. We have two pretty substantial topics tonight. We're going to start with the EAB tree program discussion. Mr. Love, this is your topic for the night.
Yes,
I'll turn
good
it over to
evening,
you.
Mayor and Council. So my presentation's just getting pulled up here. We've been talking about EAB a lot. It's been primarily a discussion about management of EAB on public land or in the public right-of-way. Tonight, we're going to be kind of switching that discussion a little bit, and we're going to be looking at EAB on private property. So with that, we will jump into taking a look at what other cities are doing. So I reviewed about 50 cities to kind of see what other cities are doing, and they generally fell into one of three buckets as shown on here. The first one would be no city program. The other one would be offering discounts, and then the third one, city programs. So, or city, I should say city-funded programs. So we'll go into this a little bit. When we say no city programs, most cities, virtue of their city code, manage diseased and hazard trees through the city code process. They are the responsibility of the property owner to manage. And when these things come up, it's a code compliance item. Generally, staff would, in Maplewood, I should say, staff would notify a property by letter if they have a tree that they have to manage, whether it be, again, EAB, oak wilt, or something like that, or if it's a hazard. That letter would let the residents know what the issue is, what they need to do to abate the issue, and a time frame for it. In the end, if the resident doesn't follow through on that, the city does have the ability to go in and manage that hazard, and then that cost would be assessed back to the property. And so that's something that most cities have already in their city code, and so does Maplewood. Offering of discounts. So the first one that I saw out there, which Maplewood does, is offers a discount on replacement trees. So we do that with our tree sale each year, where we offer discounted trees to our residents. The second one that I found was discounted tree injection program. So this is trying to treat the tree to kind of keep it alive throughout, even though EAB is in the area.
Councilmember Juniman has a question.
Yes, Steve, I know several years ago, Jeannie Gaynor was looking into this, and do we know, is there any more success rate with trees that are treated now, and how safe are those chemicals?
Mayor and Council, I'd have to look into that a little bit more. One of the
Okay.
things I was going to note about the treatment of trees is that we also have to look into, if we're going to provide that or try to negotiate that, we'd have to look in to see whether the trees in this area are still at a point in which injections are beneficial to the tree. So there'd be a little more legwork there.
Okay, thank you.
City Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and council members. Councilmember Juniman, to your question. So the city of North St. Paul offers a tree injection program discount with an established provider, and their threshold is 30% of the tree canopy, in deterioration, and that's their threshold. And then there's the only thing that they do is they'll guarantee a replacement tree in 10 years if the injection program doesn't work. So there is something on the back end to do replacement, but that's kind of how their program works.
I do recall that when Jeannie Gaynor was looking into it, there was some question about the safety of the chemicals involved to other.
Mayor and Council, I
Fauna.
think there was concern about like other insects, and then
Right.
as that goes through the food chain.
Yeah.
So I just don't have that research available right now.
Thank you.
And I would just comment that based on my observations, and this is just anecdotal, but driving around, I don't know that the trees that I'm seeing have 30% of their canopy left. Pretty much, they look pretty dead. And I think that the winter exacerbated the problem. It seemed to really escalate and move much faster. So that the trees are looking worse this spring than they did last fall. But that's just my thought.
Yes, Mayor and Council. So one of the things that they say about EAB is it's in an affected area. It starts off very gradually, and then that slope really starts to take off. And I think that's what you're seeing happening. It's just that we're in a fully infested area, and it's ramping up, so.
It sure is. Councilmember Cate.
And just one comment on the tree injection program. It's also not just a one injection. So this is something that, it's a cost benefit here. You do it once and it's a continual, you'd have to put money aside because it's just not one shot.
Yes, Mayor and Council, what I've seen is it's once every 2 years, typically is what I've seen, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and then city programs on private property. So the cities that I did find that provided financial assistance, they generally were funded through grants. And most of those grants come with certain restrictions, and most of those revolve around income qualified. The other program that I did see out there that cities provide was assessment to property taxes. This could be for a partial funding of a tree removal or the full funding of a tree removal. So for available funds, what we've seen is, oh, yes.
Hi. Just a question on that. What's the difference between that and code enforcement? Because with code enforcement, if we went in and had them do it, could we assess the property, or do they have to pay?
Yes, Mayor and Council. So I'll touch on that in a little bit more, but essentially it's a voluntary program. They sign a waiver to the assessment, and what I saw other cities doing is they might say, okay, we'll pay for half, and then we'll allow you to assess the other half. There was variations on that. The nice, and I'll touch on this too, the nice things with an assessment program is it's very flexible. So I'll get to that here in just a couple slides. So for available funding, what we found out there were federal grants, DNR grants for public trees, which we were in front of you a couple times on, and will be again tonight. DNR grants for private trees. There was a grant. We've been successful in getting some grants for planting of trees. There was a grant here recently, and I believe they're going to be offering one in 2024, 2025. Assessment programs, and then also city-funded programs. So for tonight's discussion, I kind of came up with 5 different options. Just know that as we're going through this, you're not limited to these 5. You do have the ability to maybe take something from different ones. So we'll just kind of jump into these real quick. So again, we can continue as we are with where we don't have a private tree program, where the management of those trees are the property owner's responsibility, and we would enforce that through our code enforcement process as today. We can continue to offer discounts through the replanting of trees. We can look into negotiating a reduced treatment costs, and this is where, again, I would echo that we have to look into it a little bit more to further understand whether the trees in this area are eligible, and then along with Councilman Juniman's comments about the safety of the injections. So for grant opportunities, the DNR public grant, we did receive one here in 2024. Again, I mentioned that I believe there's going to be another solicitation for another round for private tree removal. And then also federal funding, example would be ARPA funding. I believe most of ours has been allocated already. But we could look for those type of options. So when we look at grant opportunities, this is something that staff could continue to actively pursue. A couple comments on grant opportunities. They tend to be a little less flexible. They come with their own rigid kind of, this is exactly what you're allowed to use it for. I've mainly seen them to be income qualified, to be able to partake in that. There's a larger amount of staff time in management of those type of programs. And then also the scope is also defined by the grant. They might only cover, for example, the cutting down of the tree, but maybe not the grinding of the stump and planting. For assisted city assessment program, EAB tree removal costs could be assessed to the property taxes. This would allow for payment over time. It kind of takes some of that burden on, especially off of a person if they have multiple trees even. It reduces the impact of that property owner. This would be very similar to our emergency sanitary sewer emergency fix, where we allow them to have the work done and have that cost assessed back to their property taxes. It essentially can act like a revolving loan fund. This is the most flexible because we can make it however you want it. Should it be income qualified? Should it not? Should there be a difference if, you could have a model where maybe partially if you're not income qualified, it can be helped, or it could be fully income qualified. Removal costs only. So one of the things I saw in a lot of programs in other cities is they just covered the cost of cutting down and taking away the tree. The stump stays, nothing's done for restoration, nothing's done for replanting, and the reason for that is to try to address as many of the private trees as possible before they're a hazard. The stump won't, propagate EAB. It's not a hazard, but it could be dealt with by the property owner on their time. The way these programs work is there would be a waiver to that assessment signed prior to the work being done. The city would pay the contractor directly, and then the cost of that payment would be assessed to the property taxes over a set period of time. And then under the city-funded program, there's a couple questions. Is this a one-year program, or are we trying to set up a multi-year program? Do we want to limit a number of trees per property? Do we want to limit a certain amount of cost per tree removed? And we'll jump into two options here. First one would be more of a first-come, first-served type program. This would basically last until the funds for that year are spent. Again, when we cover the question about what costs should be covered, again, I would recommend strictly the removal costs because we do have that reduced cost for replacement trees. For city funding, do we want to cover the full cost of that removal? Do we want to cover part of it? Is there a scale that you want to do that on? Obviously, all that affects how many private trees we can help, right? If you have a set amount of money, if you're paying the full amount, there's less trees. If you're paying half, there's probably address twice as many. So some pros and cons. This isn't open to all. It's fairly easy to administrate. There's no handling of financial data. Some of the cons is it could limit the number assisted, and it would probably be a pretty short availability window once it's announced. So option 2 would be to do strictly a income qualified program. Again, this would last until the funds come out. Same recommendations on just covering the removal costs. Again, the question about full or partial tree cost or number of trees per property that could partake in that program. So this does help those with less resources. It has the potential to do that. Some cons is it does require submittal of income data because you're doing an income qualification. It's a little bit harder to administer because of that. You're handling all that documentation. And it also limits who can potentially apply for the program. And so I'll just stop at this slide just to kind of remind you of some of the 5 things we talked about. I can jump back and forth. And again, a reminder that just because we pick one direction to go, that doesn't mean we have to stop doing like the reduced cost of the tree fund. So we can talk about what direction the council would like to go in. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Love, in the report, you indicate that the city currently has $150,000 in funding available in 2024 for this program. Do you want to remind the council members where that came from?
Yes, Mayor and Council, that came with a transfer from the EDA to address EAB.
Okay. And that's what you're talking about in terms of the city assessment program?
That is what I'm talking about as far as available funding, whether that helps fund the assessments or whether that is one of these options under a city program where it's just us helping the residents with the cost. That's the current available funding we have for it.
Thank you. I was really glad to see this on our workshop tonight because as I drive around the city in this beautiful weather, we certainly have a lot of trees that are infected with EAB. I know that we have an inventory on public land. Do we have any idea how many trees are out there on private land?
Mayor and council, I can look into that information. I don't have it at the tips of my fingertips. I know that there is there's some ways to get an estimate of what's out there based off of aerial photos.
One of my concerns is that we have so many. Once you start being alerted to EAB, that's kind of all that you see are dead trees. On Memorial Day, I was out at a cemetery and went to a Memorial Day service there, and that's all I saw were dead trees in the cemetery, along with the pines, and looking at it and thinking, this is absolutely going to be devastated when they start taking down all of these trees. And that's what I'm seeing as I drive around the city. And when you recognize how many we have and how advanced they are with the disease, my concern then comes to the windstorms, the rainstorms that we're having, and some of these trees are looking pretty weak, and that it wouldn't take much wind to topple them over. In terms of looking at the tree program options, the one that I lean towards is the city assessment program, where for private property that we would, and council members, we can all weigh in on this, but I'd like to see this be a pretty robust attack on these trees. And my thought is if we did a city assessment program just for cutting down the trees, and maybe, is it possible to maybe have a list of people that cut down trees so that we have some containment on what the costs will be? Because I know that there's a big range out there, and there are maybe some tree trimmers or tree services that are taking this opportunity and their prices are going up, skyrocketing. But, Mr. Love?
Mayor, quick question. So you're maybe looking at, could we have some preferred vendors that potentially are part of that program?
Right, and
Okay.
so that we could then it would be rather, it certainly would be good for the vendors, but it would be great then for our citizens as well, because then they could get their trees removed, and then it would go on to their tax assessments and paid off in a certain period of time. But at least that gets the dangerous trees down quicker, and it's not such an initial burden to so many people. And it also, I think, it seems to be the most streamlined of the programs. Anytime in my mind that you start getting into qualifying with, having people come in and proving their incomes, that can be very dehumanizing, and many people may not want to do that for that reason. And this is a much bigger problem. This is across the city, and I think everyone has the issue. I did talk with Mr. Sable today about this, and he gave me a really good explanation about what a program like that would look like and how it basically can ultimately fund itself. Do you want to kind of, well, not maybe fund itself, that isn't quite the way you described it, but.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. So as we think about it, I think Steve Love did a really nice job kind of in the presentation talking about a revolving loan fund model. So if a homeowner has a tree and it's going to be $3,000 to remove and they can't afford it, but if we can defer some of the payments out over maybe a 3-year period, and the first year they pay back $1,000, and the second year $1,000, and the third year $1,000. We now have that same $3,000 available to essentially help and assist somebody else. So that one $3,000 transaction might actually take down 3 trees or 4 trees over a decade. Now, I don't know how quickly EAB will move through, and right, it might not be that fast, but if a 3-year period, if you can take down 2 trees for $3,000 rather than 1, there's some logical sense and some sense from terms of the accounting that this could help more people rather than just doing, using my raw math, just cutting down 40 trees might not be enough. But if you can to have that calculus change a little bit, that's one of the advantages of an assessment program.
Thank you. Councilmember Cave, I know your light's been on.
No, you answered a couple questions already, but I do like the city assessment program, and to put something in that keeps the program going instead of a one-time hit with Emerald Ash Borer. I know oak wilt is another one that's coming around, so I think there's always going to be something. So a tree program, I think, would be a fantastic thing to have in our city in perpetuity to keep it going. My question also was on how, like the dollar amount, and I know it varies on trees. And there's a few semantics we can talk about. I know some people have larger lots than others, and, with the trees. But I think getting our citizens aware of the fact that we have a program out there and the options of putting it on your, assessing it and stuff, I think that's going to drive the program to start, we're going to have everyone in place, the tree cutters and everything. And once we let people know, and this is our code and we have to do this, I think we should, get moving rather quickly on that.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm huge on giving out money to the community and supporting them because we have a lot of community members who don't have the means. But for this particular piece, I think having a sustainable program is important. And I also agree with you on that, Mayor and Councilmember Cave, on the city assessment program. What I think is important about that, though, is a lot of time when we have certain programs and limited fundings, it becomes a battle of who knows the process and who can get to it first. So, I'd be interested, curious to see if the council would entertain perhaps having a lottery system, so that way it's a fair system. We have an application process, everybody applies, and we do a lottery system. I don't know how many people will apply for it, but that way it gives everyone an equal opportunity to take part in this process because we have such limited funding.
Mr. Love, or maybe Mr. Sable, can you answer, would we be restricted, if we went with the city assessment, would we be restricted to just the 150,000?
Mayor, council members, I think the short answer is that we would be restricted to the 150,000 because we would have to pre-fund the amount that would go out of pocket, right out of pocket to the contractor in this case. We would have essentially, the council can decide to allocate other resources, or we can pursue other grant opportunities. But the initial phase would be that 150,000 because that is the money that has the fewest strings and the most flexibility. And so from that standpoint, you could do it that way. And, and just talking out loud, if it is successful and we're seeing people being proactive and taking steps that they maybe couldn't afford, if there were at the end of the year a positive budget variance, you could maybe assign a certain dollar amount extra to that, or if there's if it's a wild success and there's an ability to tap into, a strategic investment of general fund reserves, you could certainly entertain that option. But right now, the initial thought would be the 150,000. That is the most flexible.
Thank you. In looking at this, it's pretty. It's a really great opportunity in my mind because at the end of the year, council members, as if we have a general fund surplus, just like we designated EDA funds for EAB, if we have general fund, if a general fund surplus or undesignated items in our budget, we could move those over and fund EAB this tree program in 2025. So get it rolling in 2024 so that we can get some trees down this summer and then find different ways. And I would ask staff, I see people kind of nodding their heads, if that is the direction we want to go, that staff would be looking for ways and pockets of money that we can allocate to EAB for next year, because this is only going to get worse. And we really, I think that to the extent that we can really help our residents and even some of our business owners who have these trees on their property, this is going to help them. Well, that's a question. Do we want to help business owners as well? I don't know if any business owners have EAB trees. Do we want to just limit it to residents?
I'm interested in just residents for now, just to start it off.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Councilmember Juniman.
I'm in favor of the city assessment approach also, but that still leaves us with, are we going to go with per property or per tree, or, we need to resolve that somehow, because, and maybe you could say up to 3 trees or whatever. I mean, you don't want somebody to get, when we only have that much money to deal with, you don't want
Sure.
somebody to get a whole bundle and then somebody else doesn't have an option.
Well, and I think that if we have preferred providers that have a specific set, this is how much they're going to charge, or that they have an agreement with us. What I'm hearing from some residents and some neighbors who are having trees taken down, that, the range, depending on what company you're using, can range from $3,000 to $7,000 or $8,000, and the trees kind of look the same to me. I mean, I can't believe that there would be that much of a difference, but I think that this is a real opportunity for people, and sometimes because there's such a great need, the price is going up on it. So I think we have to contain it from that end of it as well, so that if we talk about, a city assessment program, that I would suggest that the trees that we get an idea, can we get some preferred providers for this that will help, so that we can actually do more trees and kind of extend this as broad as we can. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. Just a comment, general thought. As I was thinking through this, as I was reading earlier, do we want to make the most impact per family, per household, or do we want to make, how do I phrase this? So I was thinking we do maybe one address, one tree, and versus, if you have 3 trees on your lot, I mean, I guess it comes down to what the cost is. That's what's ultimately going to be the answer here. But, I think we have a system where perhaps, just thinking through, if someone has registered already under a certain address, they can't register again. So that way they're not put into the lottery system if we go down that route, or an application process. So that way we don't have multiple people applying for the same grant.
I guess my inclination would be by property, because if we just take down one tree, that really doesn't help anybody. If
okay.
they have other trees, Councilmember Juniman, you talked about up to 3 trees per property?
I just
Sure.
threw that out there, but, I mean, you may have some people that have 8, but we are not going
Sure.
to help somebody with 8 trees so that somebody with 1 or 2 doesn't get anything.
That's true.
I mean, part of it is to incent them to take them down and to be, to use an old phrase from my family, sometimes whatever you have that's the way the mop flops. I mean, if you ended up with a
I like that saying.
property that
Yeah.
has 10 of those trees on it, you have 10 of those trees.
I can see that. That's a good point. So you suggested
Up
3
to
trees?
3,
Up to
up
3
to 3,
trees.
and that was
Okay.
just- I just threw
Councilmember
that out.
Cave.
And I kind of like the idea of, like 1 tree per property until, they can apply again if we have extra, but there's a lot of properties in Maplewood, and I think we would help more. And then if they would get 1 tree done, they would know of the other program that they could get more at a, possibly discount if the tree guy's already there. But they do have the responsibility to take down the rest. So it's at least going to put them, the thought of the trees coming down, that they have to take care of them one way or the other. We can help with 1, but the rest are up to them. I just think we'd hit a lot more residents that way than hitting, because we do have large lots here.
We do.
You
Some
know.
of them are very large, yeah. Mr. Love, what you wanted from us was some general parameters, and we've kind of given you our preference for a city assessment program, and it sounds like there's a little bit more information to get. Basically, about how many trees are we looking at? An estimate. That might help as well to direct some of this. More information, I think, is better. And then also, what can we do in terms of preferred providers so that, well, if you could wind up with one provider charging $10,000, knowing that it's coming from the city, that's not going to be very good either. So I think that if we have some parameters on that, that would be good, if that's possible, to wind up with preferred providers for this.
Mayor and Council, we can certainly look into that. One other option I would mention is how our sanitary sewer program goes is we require them to get a minimum of 2 or 3 bids. That way, we're helping the person, make sure that they're getting what they're
Sure.
paying for. That's another option as well.
Okay. Can you get us some more
Yep.
information on all that?
Yep.
Councilmember Lee?
I'm good. Councilmember Cave mentioned what I wanted to already. I think that my big thing is how do we make the most impact in terms of family and household with this funding? So, yeah.
Councilmember Juniman? Okay. All right. Very productive discussion.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
So I want to just say thank you to the council. This is exactly the kind of conversation that we were hoping that we would get, and we got a good portion of clarity, which is always really helpful for staff. I do think there's a couple of elements that we need to work with on our end. Again, a little bit of additional research, maybe some language tweaks to our sanitary sewer emergency program. And then maybe what we'll do for the council discussion and the council approval of the adoption of the program would be to have things like, right, 1 tree per household not to exceed a certain dollar amount. And then what we'll do is provide maybe a range of options. So I'll give you, for an example, the city of Richfield caps it at no more than $5,000 per property. Is that the right number? Should it be 4,000? Could it be 3,500? And so there's maybe a range of choices, that a little menu that we'll create in sort of in each category. The other factor that I think we have to think about is what is the time horizon for this program? Is it 3 years per property? Is it 10 years? Is there a certain amount that makes the most sense? And I think as a staff, we can create something that makes sense, but also then gets money in the hands of folks. And so what we will also then have to do is figure out that mechanism pretty quickly, because this is not the season to cut down trees, right? They tend to do this work later in the fall and over through the winter, and so we want to be really up and running, I think, and get this in the hands of people as quickly as we can. And so we'll be back before you. I don't have a date in mind, but I'm going to guess it might be late July, early August.
Okay. Councilmember Juniman?
I have a question. Are we allowed to do a list of preferred vendors?
So I'll try. So the short answer is we can create a list of approved vendors off of our list. So we do license tree companies. And essentially, if they meet the minimum requirements, they can be licensed. But we can also do a request for proposals that say, they've proven that they are dedicated to this community, and we can create some criteria where they can do that. So we can encourage.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Love. Moving on to our next topic, the legislative session recap.
It shouldn't take long.
Mr. Sabal, this is your topic.
Well, thank you, Mayor and council members. This is the legislative session just ended last week. There was a lot of activity. I think it was the first time they've ever done a bill that was called Omnibus Prime, which was 1,400 pages, right, as a child of the 80s, and Transformers were a thing. I think it's a great joke, so I'm gonna tell it in public. And so, but it was a very different ending to a legislative session than what we've typically seen. As you know, that we are part of the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities. Both of them provide sort of lobbying services, and they advocate on behalf of cities. The downside is that the League of Minnesota Cities serves over 800 cities. Metro Cities serves that 75 75 cities in the metro area, and they're really our key source of information. And I'll just note that people are preparing their legislative summaries, and so you can check the FYI last week talks about the The league is going to do theirs, I believe it's on June 3rd, and so you can just kind of get a recap. But I do want to talk about, there's really, that we noted 5 key areas where we saw lots of movement or lots of discussion at the legislature. You'll remember this body took a position related to housing. There was a significant bill for preempting local control of housing issues. We were asked and weighed in on our preferences for housing issues. This is also the second year of a biennium, which is always known as the bonding bill year. So at the state legislature, they do the budget. They do a 2-year budget in the first year, and then they do what they call cleanup of language that they wanted to fix, and then elements of the bonding bill. Cannabis was another significant portion of that, and this group, this body just discussed it a few weeks ago. I do want to point out that EMS was a topic. It was primarily greater Minnesota and cities outside of the metro area. They're having just a really difficult time responding to calls. Sometimes it's taking 45 minutes to an hour to get EMS services. I say that because it's actually going to impact the metro area, not Maplewood, because our response times have been terrific, but I think the system is showing cracks, and it's going to be an issue. And then I want to talk about just some next steps that we are going to see. So with regard to housing policy, there was actually, I should have led with the first slide, which is there was more that didn't happen than did happen. I think the Coalition for Housing Advocates ran into some significant opposition from cities that said, wait a minute, we're on the ground, we know what works, and our voice needs to be at the table. And I think so what they did is they put a pause on a significant number of their housing initiatives, but they do have changed some reporting requirements for locally funded housing expenditures. It's to have annual reporting mechanism. I say that partially because there is, in 2025, the city will be receiving its portion of the metro area sales tax for housing. And so we're going to actually have more money to put towards housing resources. And I think this was an effort to make sure that it's well documented. The other one is a really technical component, but it's exempt city comp plans from being subject to the requirements around environmental review, largely born out of several lawsuits out of the city of Minneapolis, but it does also impact all other cities. And I shared that this is the things that didn't happen. There was no missing middle housing language. This was that effort to really upzone really all and eliminate single-family residential standards. There was a proposal to have multifamily allowed in any commercial area by right, and then there was proposed changes to accessory dwelling units by right in every neighborhood, and then there was also an elimination of parking requirements. All of those things failed to be included in the final bill. I will note that all 4 of those issues are going to come back in the next legislative session, so housing will continue to be front and center at the legislature, and I'm going to say that again later on one of my later slides about why it's important. I apologize for the fuzziness of this picture, but there was no bonding bill for the East Metro Public Safety Training Facility. The bonding bill, I think, was several minutes past the deadline when it was introduced, and so it was not considered. But this was our attempt to get support for the roughly $35 million construction project to do the East Metro Public Safety Training Facility, and so the lack of a bonding bill is really felt statewide, primarily in state agencies. One of the things that the committee chairs talked really passionately about was that local projects needed to have more support locally and also replacement dollars for projects in the future. So if you got money, for example, in 2024, you needed to bond for and build for its replacement in 30, 40, 50 years. And so they're really trying to, I think, push more decision-making and more control down on the locals, which is often what states do, as we often call them unfunded mandates, but this is a slight variation of that, of really of forcing local units of government to pay for projects ahead of time and not rely so much on the state. I talked about this a little bit, but the EMS, emergency response system, was created to oversee the EMS network. So there's now an Office of Emergency Medical Services. This is something that was born out of the EMS task force, which was created 2 years ago. And so what we recognize is that there's a growing need for EMS services everywhere, primarily greater Minnesota. And so there was money that was put aside. And what I think this, for us, is one of the things that we're watching is if there's going to be actual structural changes to the EMS system. The current network is really divided up by maps and territories. And what we're seeing, and Chief Monder will talk about during the budget season, is that lots of communities will rely on somebody else's service in providing mutual aid. And we also know that Alina is one of our significant requesters of that service. And so what we're seeing is a lot of tension, a lot of fracturing of the EMS system. And so we're watching the creation of this office and what it means and what its impact might be on Maplewood. I apologize for this slide for including this many words, but as we talked about a few weeks ago, cannabis legislation that was passed initially needed significant changes. These are kind of the highlights of those. Councilmember Lee noted earlier a vetted lottery system to distribute licenses with elements around social equity, so to encourage and promote small minority and women-owned businesses to get into the cannabis business, because it has been largely funded by significant national players, and so there's not been small local businesses that have been able to get in. Some changes to permissions for growing, so you can grow on behalf of somebody who if you're an assigned caregiver, you can double the number of home plants that you can grow. There's some other things that we have finally eliminated. The Office of Medical Cannabis is now rolled into one, so that is a streamlining that we think is helpful. And then just some technical changes to how bars and restaurants can serve THC-infused beverages. But this, as we forecasted a couple of weeks ago, and as you'll see in a few weeks, cannabis is coming. The calendar is undefeated, and so we're going to get to the start of the new year. And these changes really help give us a little bit of clarity, but we still have some work to do, and I forecasted that calendar for the rest of the year. And then I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about next steps. One of the things that I've seen successful in places is that they have a legislative platform that outlines, here are the 3 or 4 priorities for us. Here are the things that we would like to see the legislature engage in. It's really helpful for our legislative delegation to know what matters to this governing body, and so that they can be advocates for it. So I would like to work later this fall with the senior staff and the department heads and pull together what we think might be a small, simple legislative program for this body to consider. We wouldn't have to do that until December, or even really the first meeting in January. The other thing I wanted to identify is our bonding request is a pretty sizable number. It's a big ask for a city. It's a big number. And what we want to make sure is that the people who are going to use that facility show their support for it. So taking action to do letters of support, taking formal actions as governing bodies to come forward and say, yes, we support this project, our public safety staff will use it, and here's our stamp of approval. That work, it's not, I'll say this, it's not terribly complicated, but it is hard work to go ask those potentially 30 other agencies for letters of support. And we'll work with the Public Safety Director Beardeman and others to kind of gather that, because I will say that the support from the public safety community is all there. And sometimes legislators want to hear from city councils and mayors. And so that just getting that extra support. In addition, there might be another project that we want to consider, maybe a smaller dollar amount that we can put in more than one request. As the second largest city in Ramsey County, I think we're worthy of more than one ask and should act like it. And then there's also some technical changes to the law that we might consider. Later this summer, we're going to talk about strategic planning for economic development and sit down as the EDA and say, okay, what do we want to accomplish in the next year? What tools do we have available? Is there potential to use tax increment financing differently than what we currently propose? So I don't know what that answer will be, but I know that the conversation later this year might drive legislative changes in 2025. And then the last thing is potentially having lobbying efforts. The public safety training facility team engaged in a lobbyist to do support for the bonding bill. It's fairly common for cities because we're often on the receiving end of lots that the state does. Do we want to have a slightly larger voice at the legislature advocating on behalf of things that are important? It's a question that I'll bring up during the budget cycle, but I want to just mention it now that, you know, a robust lobbying effort might pay some dividends, and we'll kind of flesh out what that would mean. So with that, Mayor and Council, I will open it up for questions.
Council members, are there any questions? I thought you did a very good job synthesizing 1,400 pages of material that, you know, I think the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities is still trying to get through everything to figure out what happened. And that's always a challenge. Councilmember Cave.
Okay, I will have a question. I'm still a little confused with the whole cannabis thing. I feel like the information we received that they kind of ended with is still is clear as mud. And it's happening.
And you're shocked?
I'm not shocked.
Oh, okay.
But it's happening so quickly. And I mean, before we know it, 2025 is going to be on us. And so I know we're in the process of still, you know, trying to keep our city, you know, on the front of this. But what else do you see or can you comment on that we need to maybe up our game before it happens in 2025?
Sure. Mayor, council members, Councilmember Cave, I think the short answer is we're the key date, I think, for us is really that July timeframe where they're going to create the model ordinance that cities can adopt. We're waiting for the state to create their set of rules. And then once they develop a set of rules, we'll develop a model ordinance that helps do that. And then from that point, that's really the triggering mechanism for the council to decide where it gets sold, when, what are the hours of operation, any other restrictions we want to put on either geography or, you know, near schools or near churches. And so what I can share is that we are likely to have, we are required to have a minimum of 4 stores in Maplewood. We will know the rulemaking process by July. And then from that sort of October, November timeframe is when we'll make choices around any restrictions, if any, what that would look like. There is the League of Minnesota Cities does have a working group of city clerks and community development heads and attorneys that are sort of shepherding it through of what that model ordinance would look like. And a member of Kennedy and Graven and Ron Beatty's firm is on that team. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to get, whatever happens, we're going to get that information quickly and be able to respond. And it is terribly complicated and frustrating.
Thank you.
Just is.
You know, you did a
That was
very
a
good
nice way to
job
put
of
that.
clearing the mud away a little bit. At least we know a timeline. And yes, it is very frustrating. But we've got great staff, and we're going to figure this out, and we will be ready to go. So,
I have to say, when I saw this on the agenda, I went, well, that won't take long.
that, you know, that's true. We have a little bit of extra time. So we have no other subjects on our agenda for tonight, and so therefore we will be adjourned. That was a good recap.